we are opening the evening with Madelyn Blair, who is joining this conference not for the first time, which I totally adore. Madelyn is the founder and principal of Bellray and a master story practitioner. And she's going to share with us how every manager is a chief story officer. And I believe this will be really practical and um, deep diving approach as always. So Madelyn, I just made you the host. The go on air button should be on upper right. It's yellow in case it's written in Russian. Madelyn, welcome to the conference.
Oh, thank you, Artem. I'm having a little bit of, there I am. Okay. The light is
Lovely
not
to see
good,
you.
does it?
Sorry?
Doesn't look like there's enough light.
No, it looks fine. It looks fine.
Okay, good.
Yes, the connection is good. I will be off air just as we discussed before. Let me know when to launch the slides, the video, and we're all here for you. Guys, let's greet Madelyn with our fires and show how warm it is here on the conference. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here this evening, this morning, whenever it is. I'm always happy to join Artem. Well, I'm going to talk about this thing, the fact that I see every manager as being a chief story officer. We know what a CFO is, or a COO, or even a CEO. All of these areas involve capabilities of every manager who desires to be effective. We have to watch our budget. You have to be aware of workflows and material requirements, and you have to know where staff can do their work. We tend to look at decision making as if it's only the big ones, but it's the thousands of decisions made every day that line managers make to support their staff. In other words, the areas a line manager is responsible for, regardless of title, find storytelling rinses through it all. My emphasis will be on developing storytelling fluency, a place where every manager plays a role, even if only to encourage staff to seek out stories that amplify or exemplify a need. Taking this approach optimizes the possibility of putting storytelling into the hands of those who feel immediately drawn to the task while offering support to those who learn it over time. And this session will include, but not be limited to, stories of how the use of storytelling aided in quick understanding of a concept, better performance reviews, building resilience, that magic that allows teams and organizations to overcome the unexpected. Okay. But there are genuine focus points that any manager must work to perfect. Planning. You've got to plan the year or you've got to plan the day. When you're assembling teams, you need to work together to achieve the mandate. And that's all about organizing. If you inherited staff, as I have many times, you still need to think about where they will thrive the best. Directing or leading. Now this is about clarity. People don't know what they are to do unless they can see the desired result. And finally, controlling. This is about getting the right performance to guide, and I call it tweaking. Now, can storytelling help you in each of these functions? Unquestionably. You can't plan, organize, or lead without understanding, without seeing it. The concept of vision, you have to see it. Your staff don't improve without opportunities and recognition through ongoing feedback and performance. And it has to be from more than one perspective. You won't have the capacity to meet changes in direction and control without resilience. And resilience means that your staff have confidence, curiosity, and connection. Now, Let's put story into the mix. So if story fits everywhere, how does it help us see from every perspective and remain confident, curious, and connected? What happens when we put story into the mix of our skill set? Many years ago, I worked with a board. Their mandate was global and impactful. I was excited to work with them. When I arrived, there was actually no excitement in the room. Clearly, they had lost sight of their own vision. My task was to get them to re-envision their mandate and get back on being the enthused group they had met. As it was the first time I was meeting the entire board, I wanted to get to know them, so I asked them to tell me a personal story about why they participated on the board. What was the story that made the decision to work with the board the right decision for them? They were a little confused at first, but being willing to go along, they began to tell their stories. And as we went from one person to another, the room began to brighten. More importantly, the image the group's mandate, what they saw it could do, became clearer and clearer. And within 90 minutes, storytelling had done its work. This is an example of using story to help people get back in touch with their own values for the organization. The funny thing is, it also builds trust for the organization. And it builds trust as members realize the confluence of values. I've watched this happen again and again. Here's another example. One of the members of the team I was working with was struggling to determine how to handle a particular problem. Now, we knew he would find the answer, but he asked us to brainstorm possibilities with him. Instead, we did something called narrative practice. Now, narrative practice is a way to work with all of our stories in a particular manner. In this case, it meant that the person wanting help tells his story from the beginning, as he knows it, to the present moment where he can't decide what to do. The others were instructed to listen to the story with care and with charity, no blaming, just acceptance that this was how he saw it. We asked him to tell the story of how he found this problem, who was involved, what did it look like in as much detail as possible. We then asked him to sit back, not say another word until asked, and let the others work on possible endings to his story. Now, each person, other than the teller, then created an ending using the earlier part of the story as just that, the beginning of the story. The people could create an ending of their own, or they could build on other people's endings. And when everyone had a chance to contribute to an ending, the original teller was then asked to respond. Now remember, he was silent up to this point. What happened then was almost magical. The teller was impressed with how others had processed the pieces with which he had struggled. He was even able to see new things, and in the end, modified the suggested endings only slightly. He saw the problem with new eyes, and the issue was so much better. The use of story, in this case narrative practice, removed negative emotions for easier acceptance, and the possibilities became clearer. Now, am I on the right slide? Hold on. I think maybe I need one more. Maybe? Yes. I talked about the fact that reviewing performance is really important. But one of the areas where managers wish they had magic glasses is to know that when they select someone, that person will be successful in doing the job that's needed. Now, instead of magic glasses, I have found that asking candidates to tell me a story about something they have done about which they are very proud, it gives me all the information I need to make a good decision. I remember the first time I chose to use this technique. I had an important position to fill that required real commitment to the mission. Now, good intentions were not enough. And after several interviews, I decided I needed more. I would try a new method as part of the interview because the questions I had been asking didn't seem to give me the real sense of commitment to a goal. I asked the candidate to tell me a story about something she was proud. She paused for only a few moments, and then she said, unquestionably, it was when I raced in my first marathon. She told me that it was a very hot climate where she was running, with a baking sun. So she had to prepare not only for the stamina to run the miles, but to prepare herself for a serious physical challenge that she was actually submitting herself to. She said it took months to prepare for it, with lots of research and preparation. She proudly said she made the run from beginning to end, and then said, I've never regretted the challenge, the pain, the preparation. It gave me a real sense of accomplishment. Notice that embedded in that story were the challenges she felt she had to overcome. Embedded in that story was the commitment she gave to solving the issue or addressing the challenge. And embedded in that story was what she valued. Taking all of this, I got a real insight into what she would bring to her work. There it was. This was someone who, once committed to a goal, did whatever was needed to achieve it. I hired her on the spot. Confidence, because now we're going to go to this aspect of resilience, building resilience. Oftentimes guests on my show, for those of you who don't know, I have a television show called Unlocked, based really on my book, Unlocked, all about resilience. But we cover a lot of management topics. Oftentimes guests on my show will ask for something that is not the usual. Some ask to do their part of the show from outdoors. The scenery is lovely. But there's wind and their mic is picking it up. Some ask to please finish in exactly 45 minutes, which means that it must be recorded as if it were live. Much more pressure. Some call in from a busy airport. It's the only time I've got to talk, Madelyn. I have learned to build natural margins into the work, so I know what I can say yes to and what is a non-starter. On one of my shows, I was delighted to arrange to have a co-host, a special co-host to join me, who I knew would bring a totally new perspective and dimension to the conversation. Alas, the guest, when presented with what I considered to be a fantastic offer, said, "No, I want a one-on-one with you only." Now, I could have said no. It's all been arranged. It would be embarrassing to go to the other expert who is going to join us as a co-host. I chose, however, to say yes. I would do it one-on-one, even though I had to call my co-host and ask her to back out. You know, when you have asked a favor, it's embarrassing to have to go back and say, well, I don't need the favor. You risk a relationship that may have taken years to develop. I had to choose, and I had to be a choice that I knew was the right one and that I would weather the temporary embarrassment. I was confident that I could do this. And the lesson here was why I knew this. There were earlier in my life times when I would have been overwhelmed by a request that completely changed my plan, required me to back out of a commitment, and I am very big on commitment, and do more work than I had planned. Over the years, I have done a continuous practice that has made the difference. I write stories from my life in a large journal, and I mean it's large, very thick. Story after story. No particular rationale for the selection of the story. In fact, I've even written the same story over and over again just to see what comes up as I write it. As you write your own stories over time, you begin to understand where your own strength comes from. No one has to tell you. You begin to understand where you need to improve even, and no one has to nag you. You see it yourself. Over time, you become the voice. Over time, let me say that differently. You become the choice maker for yourself. I sometimes ask managers to observe themselves when they're running a meeting. They all laugh at me. And then afterwards, when they really do it and write that story out to themselves, they go, that's why she asked. And when you do that, you begin to understand what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, when you choose our response, in our response lies our growth and our freedom. When was the last time you remembered a choice you made that surprised you, but was exactly the right one? Highly resilient people know who they are and act on that knowledge. Curiosity. Another of the characteristics of highly resilient people is that they are insatiably curious. I mean, they are always asking questions. They're always seeking new knowledge. You just can't stop them in a way. Then I remembered a story of a city that needed to rebuild their water system. You know, the system that delivers water to all the homes. Now, these systems always lie underground. So it's a big deal to update the water system so that every home has water with minimal interruption. It was the kind of challenge that had 3 levels to it. One was that the people who were trying to solve the problem had to have really good knowledge of how to deliver water, how to do piping, how to do construction. The group that was meeting on the issue included exactly that kind of expertise. Second, they had to have curiosity. They had to be willing to ask questions, explore many possibilities, imagine like crazy, and spot implications. But the question was, would they ask the questions that might be difficult? Thirdly, they needed to have a sense that it could be done. If they didn't believe they could do it, the first step would never happen. Because remember, they hadn't done it before. The organizers who were leading this planning activity realized that they could take a lot of time bringing in people who had done similar kinds of projects to tell them, how they've done it. But every story would confront the issue of relevance. Would the context of other solutions work in their context? And even if they saw some connection, would they believe they could do it? Really believe it was possible? The organizers decided to take a very different approach. They knew these people understood all the technical stuff. That was done. They had all the technical information they needed to solve this problem and to plan. What they needed was willingness to be curious and keep asking questions. And finally, that they could do it. Now, the organizers placed the planning session inside a museum. They put it into a gallery dedicated to the Apollo mission to the moon. Lots of huge photos, pictures, lots of images completely surrounded the group. Can you imagine sitting in that moment? It was a group. The task is so monumental as to put men on the moon. A funny thing happened, though. The group could see that if another group of people could surmount the issues of sending someone to the moon,
There was enough smarts in this group, in this room, in this time, to surmount their challenge. They just needed to be curious and open their minds. It was not just about learning. It was about opening possibilities, even when it might not look logical. In the end, this group developed a plan and implemented it in their city. This is a case where the Apollo images told a silent story. The images surrounding them created a place where they were creating their own ideas, and surfaced the implied stories within them. This is why we use fairy tales, myths, legends, to not just tell us what not to do, but to remind us that we are the agents of the future. We miss the power of fairy tales because we say, they're not real. They're just truth in a different package, one that the intended audience can unwrap for themselves. Myths and legends can capture huge truths, frankly, ones that are simply hard to hold in anything smaller than a story. Inspiring a group to stretch their own limits in a museum display of the Apollo program charged them up enough to create their own stories, from reading the silent stories captured in the images that surrounded them. What stimulates you to create your own stories? And what questions should you be asking me in this session? Put them in the chat. Highly resilient people have strong social support. When you see a child frightened about something, they grab the hand of their parent. When you see a child who lives through really difficult illness or accident, it is the strength of the support from their families that carries them through. One of my favorite clients asked me to come in and help them with a merger. They had been asked to merge not 2 units, but 3 units. Also, they were mandated that in the end of the year, they had to show evidence that that merger was worthwhile. Talk about pressure. They asked if I could help them, and I said, very happy to do so. They were indeed one of my favorite clients because they were open to ideas and they were willing to do the work. It was a challenge nonetheless because they only gave me 6 hours to work with them. Okay, as I designed that 6 hours, I realized that story was going to be the answer. I asked each of the 3 groups to begin the day by describing to their new partners what they did as a unit and a particularly challenging or rewarding project they had done. Maybe it even surprised them when they were successful. We gave them only a short period of time as we needed more to do on the action planning, and so we need to use that 6 hours carefully. When they finished, you could already see within the room a shift to the level of general appreciation of each other. You could hear things like, I knew you did XYZ, but I didn't know you did it that way. It's a terrific idea. I could use that. Step 1, helping them appreciate each other and begin to trust each other, was accomplished. Now to prepare the action plan in a manner that supported imagination and creativity as long as possible. I created 5 smaller groups, each with members from each of the 3 units. Now they sat at separate round tables, and I showed them a video clip from the movie Apollo 13. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's another Apollo example, but gosh, it's such an amazing program. Now, as you know, Apollo 13 was the trip to the moon that never happened because it was an explosion on the outward leg, and they knew that landing on the moon wasn't possible. Instead, their entire attention was focused on getting the astronauts back safely. Now, part of getting them back was constructing a way for the CO2 scrubbers on the LEM, the lunar module, to clean the air in the command module, which is where they were flying. And those scrubbers needed for a square fitting to fit into a round hole. And this had to be done using only what was available to the astronauts in the two modules. Now, normally when I talk about this, I actually show the video clip. It's about 4 minutes long. This particular scene, which is very powerful. I want to not get the conference in trouble by using it without permission, but I'm sure you can go on the internet and see the whole movie or the clip. But there is the scene where everything available that was in the spaceship, the lunar module and the command module, anything that they could put their hands on, they threw it into a huge table. And it was you could see a big pile of stuff on the scene, and around it were engineers. And the engineers were told to sort through it, find pieces that would achieve the fit, square peg into a round hole. Now, we all know that Apollo 13 came home safely. So coming back to the merger group, I looked at the team and I said, you've heard what each of your units brings to the table. And the table is heaping with things. Use what you have learned. Pretend that you are reporters who are visiting your new unit 5 years from now. Tell the story of the future you see. At the end of the time, you will report out and we'll build our action plan from what we hear and decide what our future should be. I gave them 2 hours so that they could really be creative. And when finished, the future stories that were developed were remarkable in their creativity of presentation, from a newspaper article to an interview of the CEO, and even a song. In addition, it was remarkable in the coherence across the stories, because they had created these stories themselves from their own history. They were willing to add, delete, and modify things dynamically. The trust was there, now at a very high level. The action plan seemed to almost fall out of the discussion of the future decision. We still took the time to do it well. And at the end of the 6 hours, they had produced an action plan that laid out what was needed to happen across the year of getting from where they were to actually producing that something meaningful that management would say, this merger was worthwhile. 2 weeks later, I went back to see the group. Just to see how they were doing, checking in to see if there was anything more that I could do to facilitate this. What I learned was that in those 2 weeks, those 3 units had actually achieved the items that were on the action plan and that they thought would take them 6 months to do. It was the clarity and the absolute trust that had developed because that future story was their story. It wasn't management's story. It wasn't some expert story. It was their story. And they succeeded. Artem, let's play the clip from Mary Alice Arthur, who speaks to what story can achieve in group settings.
Whatever that is. But storytelling has some other significant powers which are as yet not so widely recognized. One is the ability to create collective sense and meaning, which is absolutely instrumental inside of organizational or group contexts if you want everybody to be feeling like they are engaged and involved and believing in the way that's going forward. And the other one is healing and holing. That has been profoundly demonstrated in places like South Africa around truth and reconciliation. They've used that in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia to some extent. But that is an untapped power of story. And if I look at our current climate, I think we're really going to need that power of story now, to help us to find each other.
Yeah. Building stories together has a way of building connections as you go along. And connections build resilience. So that when the unexpected happens, there is the ability and the confidence and the trust to shift. Now, if you're a manager, you're thinking to yourself, but I've never told a story.
And I'm going to give you advice from a few of the real, I call the wisdom guys. Doug Littman, and by the way, Mary Alice is one of those wisdom people as well. So you heard the first one. Doug Littman says, and Doug, by the way, recently passed, and I miss him already. You simply have to tell the story 15 times. He said, just go and ask somebody to listen to your story. You tell it, you watch their reaction to it, and you take that into account. So then you tell it again to somebody else, and again and again and again. And he said, by the time you've told it 15 times, the story is fine. Then there's Sven Erik Eng. Sven Erik is a wonderful man from Denmark. And he talks about telling your story. Only one way you can tell your story. And you get kind of scared when you listen to him say that. And then he says, your way, at this time, in this place, to this audience. Gives you a little freedom. The third I would reference is Paul Costello. He uses narrative practice to help warring parties find common connections. Amazing man. So those are three remarkable wisdom sources. And I'm thinking myself back to some of the early lessons I learned and was taught. One was that the audience listens the story out of the teller. You may think you own that story and you begin to tell it, but in fact, it's the audience that's pulling it out of you. It's a wonderful, freeing thing to know. And when you work on your resilience, you really do it. You build your confidence, you nurture your curiosity, and you work on your connections. To me, storytelling is a skill that when mastered and used well, rinses through all these areas of management. I just want to thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I have so looked forward to speaking again at this conference. It's a very special conference to me. Please email me if you want to talk about what you learned and if you have any questions. And speaking of questions, I'm going to turn to Artem Yu to tell me what has been going on in the chat window because I don't read it while I'm presenting.
I know for sure that there has been some reflection going because the fire kept burning and burning throughout your presentation. Thank you so much for that. Guys, if you have questions, that will be a great time to ask them, and I will be leaving the links to Madelyn's resources in the chat. And while we are waiting for the questions, we do have the time for them. Quick question. You've explained several key components: resilience, curiosity, and Larissa commented that interest and curiosity caught her mind. Is there like an order you would advise people to, move through developing these capabilities, or it depends on the person which of them to master?
Mm-hmm. I always begin with using story to know yourself, because that gives you a sense of, I can do this. I've done it. I can do this. You want that initial level of confidence. I think the second is to think about who is it that's really an important support in your life, and do you really reach out and nurture that relationship because you've discovered that they're rainy day friends, so to speak. We use that phrase, and it simply means that when things are tough for you, they're there for you. And I think if you do those two things, you begin to get curious because you have a confidence that you know enough, that you are strong enough, that you can begin to question. I started this for myself. I challenge myself every time I listen to a speaker. I'm going to be the first hand that goes up to ask a question. And it's worked wonders because I listen to the speech much better, much closer, because I want to make sure I get in there and ask a question. And I absorb it and learn it better. So it's become a real practice of mine. So that's how I would do it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions in the chat that I would love to address. So Kevin is saying, I value what you say about fairy tales serving as truth in different package. How do we convince others of this?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. I'm trying to think back myself. Have I ever tackled that one myself with managers who are cynics? And I don't think I have. Possibly, I might tell them, I would talk about metaphors, because that would feel more comfortable for them to use a metaphor to exemplify. And then I could eventually then think about describing a fairy tale. Myths are easier also. You can talk about myths, and a lot of them come out of what I'm familiar with is the Greek mythology, and how we still live many of those myths today. And that's helpful as well. Wish I could give you a better answer.
This one is all right. It's really on point, I guess. It's like gradual. We need to be like not to move into fairy tales too fast. So be attentive to what kinds of stories they're ready for. One quick question from Michelle. I guess this one is good as always, because Michelle has been giving us a lot of great questions. Can or should storyteller be neutral, like Switzerland is neutral?
No, I don't think if you're telling an authentic story, you better believe in that story, because your authenticity is read and perceived by the audience. And it's your story. There is no right or wrong. It's your story. They can believe you or not. They're free to do that. And keep in mind that the story, once you've spoken it, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the listener, because it's happening in their mind. That's a great question, though. Really.
I believe that like in different processes and working with stories, we should change this position, because like for story coaching or story listening, you should be reflective and more neutral than in telling, because it like that's what the opposing person in a good way needs from you. Yeah.
Like in the narrative practice, you were coached on how to both listen to the teller and also then give your ideas about the ending. It always had to be compassionate, because it was their story to begin with. Yeah.
Love it. If you have any more questions in the chat, please let us know. And in the meantime, I will be asking Madelyn our traditional question, which goes like this. This time around, it goes like this. So story can solve various tasks in organizations, but if we could imagine that we can only use story for one task or one area, what would you be using the story for?
That's a wonderful question. Any organization is really the people. And I think if I had to, I would use it in staff relationships, whether it's recruiting somebody like the story that I told of the marathoner, or whether it's giving performance evaluations where you say, you tell the story, the context, as well as the specifics of their performance, so that the person can understand that better. I think that's where I would, if I had to choose, that's where I would put it.
Awesome. And we have one more question. So I will read it out loud, so the translator can keep it in the translation. So I love the example of working with a client. What are the signals, indicators that are an organization will work with a storyteller to unpack this kind of discovery? How can a storyteller pitch this to an organization? In my career, I've had organizations use this methodology to tackle change management, DEI, etc. So they believe in stories. My question is for the uninitiated.
Mhm. Every consultant or outside person who is asked in to help is asked in because the organization has pain, and you're there to salve that pain, to give them solutions or help them to find their solutions. But it's all about the pain. So you never go in and say, I'm a storyteller. I never go in and say, I do appreciative inquiry. I never go in and say, I do brainstorming. I never go in and say, I do institutional analysis. Those are the tools that I bring in, but that's not why they hired me. They hired me because they had confidence that my capability would be not just to solve their problem, but to help them understand it better so they could solve it themselves. So you just don't describe it that way. And it turns out if they really feel confident in you, that you understand their problem, and that's where your focus is going to be, they can be quite responsive. Like that board that, oh my goodness, that board, I couldn't believe that they were so uptight. And yet once they understood why, it flowed.
I like the focus of it. It's like we do tend to focus on the story as a tool, but then again, the tool is only used for something, for good, as a force for transformation, for clarity, etc. And the key is to pitch this transformation and the clarity and whatever the problem or the focus is. Yeah, I totally second that. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and your tempo is always so inviting to just relax and reflect on your questions. It was lovely. Thank you so much.
You make it very easy.
Those fires in the chat are burning for you, and thank you so much for joining our conference. We'll be moving on, and feel free to stay and keep being with us.
I will.
Thank you.